Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, a safe space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I'm Beth Syverson, an adoptive mom of a 19-year-old son, Joey, who is struggling to find his path. I'm walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. We are committed to helping anyone touched by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. Today's guest is a Colorado adoptee and legislative advocate, Rich Uhrlaub. He's been an activist for adoptees' rights for the past 25 years, and he has a passion for self-advocacy and adoption reform. He is a board member of Adoption Search Resource Connection, a nonprofit, volunteer-led group that supports adoptees in search. And he's a composer with an adoption-related musical in development called For the Record. I will put the link to some demo songs from his musical in the show notes, but the website is ftrmusical.com. And he also runs a male adoptees support group, including an annual retreat in the Rockies that I hope my son will be able to go to someday. Hey, glad to have you here on Unraveling Adoption, Rich. So glad you're here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's an honor.
Thank you. No, it's my honor. Well, I really want to dig into adoption legislation topics, but can you first briefly tell us your adoption story? I always want to elevate people's adoption story.
Sure. I was conceived somewhere in a major Midwestern city, but
that's as close as we get.
But born and adopted here in Denver. My birth mother came to Denver once she found out she was pregnant. And a little bit different story. It wasn't the classic teenage in the backseat whoops kind of thing. She was 25 and my birth father was 35. Uh-huh. He was a businessman. It was an office affair, basically.
Okay.
And so he actually set her up and paid for her to have an apartment here while she was pregnant with me. She got a job as a part-time secretary and lived just a few blocks from downtown. Mm-hmm. He would come out to visit. He reportedly was out here for my birth and flew back. People who knew them said that he was handing out cigars at his office, which was interesting, even though he was a married man.
Wow.
Separated at the time, but a married man.
Okay.
If you've seen Mad Men, he was the Don Draper of his area. So interesting stuff. But I was adopted at about 3 weeks old. I'm a June baby. And so they adopted me, brought me home. I remember my adoptive mom saying she was from the South. And so she had all these little phrases. And so she said it was the 4th of July weekend and it was hot as Hades.
Okay. Because we don't say HE double hockey sticks. So
that's right. It was hot as Hades. And so they were trying to get the room ready. I guess they got the call on a Friday or something, and they were supposed to get me on that Monday.
Oh boy.
And
that's quick.
Beyond that, I had an older adoptive sister, a younger sister who came along. They didn't think they could have kids, but a younger sister who came along, as often happens. Grew up in Southwest Denver, kind of the classic leave it to beaver suburban life. Mm-hmm. Went to college at CU Boulder, got a master's from CSU while I was working, and always wanted to know. My parents were always honest about the fact that I was adopted. There was kind of a shift. I was around 5 or 6 years old. My older sister, who was mad at me, rather than the story being, you were our son and we chose you and we loved you, the narrative shifted to, mom's not your real mom. And this was from my older sister, who was also adopted. And so, kids do mean things.
Yeah, they do. That stings.
So that sent me into a tailspin for a while. Yeah. And I don't know why this helped my little brain click, but one day my mom just said, she was your first mom. I'm your real mom.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, okay. And, kids, as kids do, just kind of went on from there. But the seed was planted and I always wanted to know. And it wasn't really, I didn't grow up in an environment where it was really openly communicated. It was made clear to me that it was a taboo topic. It made her uncomfortable and we just weren't going to talk about it anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's back in the day, right? I think you're about my age.
Yeah, definitely baby scoops, 1960s era. So
that's the way it was.
That was the way it was. And I get all that.
Yeah.
So when I turned 21, I remember they gave me my non-identifying information that had descriptions and family history and the ages of aunts and uncles and that sort of thing, but no names. And, I always wanted to know. Internally, I thought, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but I guess that's good to know. And then after a decade of trying to figure out who I was and blowing up a career and a marriage, I was home one Christmas and they found some documents that they had mysteriously forgotten locked in our safe for 10 years.
Oh, really?
And that had my birth name on it.
Oh.
Which opened the door for me to be able to search. And that's really when I met Adoptees in Search here in Denver after living some different places. And that really launched me into a lot of the work that I'm doing now.
Okay.
Once I had a name, it was easier to search, but internally I had been searching all my life and really off and on flailing about for 15 years, trying to figure out what do I do with this information? How could I possibly find them? And so that led to some really great people who were able to provide therapy and finish my sentences and knew how to search with the information that I had.
Nice.
And from there, the rest is history.
Were you able to find your birth family?
So both my birth parents passed away before I was out of high school.
Oh, boy.
Which was a pretty major blow after wanting to know so bad for so long. But I met a couple of aunts and some cousins and some half siblings on my mother's side. Got a no from half siblings on my birth father's side.
Okay.
But a warm welcome, very forthcoming with family information and history and photos on my birth mother's side.
Okay.
And just a very healing connection. One aunt in particular, her first name is Linda. She was incredibly helpful and rounded up all kinds of information and people for me to meet when I went up there to visit. And shortly before she died, she mustered up the courage and invited me to an extended family reunion. And, you know, when you walk in, everybody's kind of like, and you are?
Yeah. Did you walk into the wrong party?
How have we not seen you here for the past
that must have been
30, 35 or 40 years?
Once they figured out who you were, did they celebrate you or was it just awkward all around?
You know, here's what was interesting. The older women, like the matriarchs in the group, were completely relaxed with it and welcoming and warm and funny. The younger ones, who you would think would be thinking a little more progressively, were a little thrown off by it all.
Oh, really?
So go figure, you know?
Oh my gosh. Well, it sounds like your adoption story is not filled with super bad tragedies and abuse or anything like that. You had just a regular old upbringing. Certainly adoption brings its own trauma, but it doesn't sound like you are fighting against, you know, a horrible background. Is that close? But you're still fighting. So can you help us understand that?
Yeah. One of the first things that Linda, my biological aunt, said when I sent a picture to her before we had met in person, she called me up and she said, I can tell by this picture that you were loved.
Oh, nice. Oh, I just got goosebumps. Yeah. And so you felt that too?
Oh, yeah. It was post-World War II, classic family with all the hangups and all the ways that we did not communicate back then.
Sure.
But nobody was beating me. My parents stayed married. It was a stable family. My dad had a good job. We went on summer vacations. I went to summer camp.
Nice.
So apart from normal bumps and a couple of abnormal bumps, but that happens in life too. So I'd say it's not some of the stories you hear that are just so rough that people deal with in their adoptions. That was not my experience. It was, by all accounts, I would say it was a successful adoption.
Okay. And your interest in adoptee rights, then how did that come about?
Well, one year at Adoptees in Search, there was an announcement. There was a big movement to seal all adoption records nationwide for 99 years.
What?
And that was being promoted, I believe, by the NCSL, the National Conference of State Legislatures.
Oh, wow.
And so there was going to be a hearing about it. And we all got up in arms and decided we were going to go down and testify. We had no idea what we were doing, but we went to this hearing and shared our thoughts. And of course, everybody who was on the panel, everybody who was in charge, was all part of the system. We were the only voices representing the actual people affected by this.
And by the system, you mean the adoption industry, the several billion-dollar adoption industry system? Yeah,
I mean, lobbyists, government people, adoption agency people who were all the experts.
And what year was this?
1995-ish, 95, 96, I want to say.
So this was the start of your 25 years of activism.
So that's really what woke me up to the issue. And then the door opened where one of our members was the adopted daughter of a woman who was a staffer for a fairly prominent Republican in the state house at the time. And so she invited her mom to talk to our group about how to do legislation.
Inside scoop. I love that.
Yeah. And so she said, this can happen, and here's how you do it.
Nice.
On top of that, there had been a law passed in Colorado in 1989 that established a confidential intermediary program, which in that day was revolutionary. It was the second one in the nation. Washington State had one, and Colorado was just the second one.
What does that mean, confidential intermediary?
The way that it works in adoption land is that rather than fully unsealing the records, and adoptees in Colorado had been working on that since the mid-1970s, when Mayor Webb, who was then Representative Webb, carried a bill and got death threats over a records access bill.
Wow. He was trying to get more access for adoptees, and he got death threats?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Goodness.
It was wild.
Wow.
And I wasn't aware of it then, but he put that in his book. He put that in his memoir.
Wow.
And so what we ended up doing was backtracking to the confidential intermediary program. A judge who was the presiding judge in the Denver Juvenile Court at the time, with no motion before him, declared the new law for confidential intermediaries unconstitutional. And so something like 500 people had already signed up to get an intermediary, which is someone where they're appointed by the court, they get access to the records, they do a search, make contact with the other party. If there's consent, then they go back to the searching party and put them together. And so it's a buffer designed to protect the, quote, confidentiality of the parties.
Wow. But in what way would that have been unconstitutional?
Well, that is a great question.
That judge just didn't want it.
So we got up in arms and did not like that at all. There was a lawsuit filed over it. A news story broke that he was, in fact, the son of someone who had fathered a child on the East Coast with a family babysitter.
Oh, boy. So he was trying to protect his dad's reputation.
Yeah.
Gosh.
And as it turns out, that child has also been an activist on the East Coast. So I know her, she knows me, he knows us. It's all.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. This is the behind the scenes stuff
It's
that no one knows about.
Stuff.
Wow.
Well, but it became very public because what he did, he was ultimately censured by the Colorado Supreme Court.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
And news stories broke, so it all became very public.
Okay, good.
We had him come to speak at one of our meetings. I mean, he's a nice guy.
Really?
Interpersonally.
Okay, so
between all that and me going, nobody should have to look for 15 years to find dead people. That's really what drives the passion.
Yeah. Oh, man, that's for sure. And you're not a lawyer, or you didn't go to school for law?
No, I worked in a legal environment for 8 years with attorneys. And so understand how laws and legislation work, and have drafted legislation that's actually in the Colorado law right now.
Really? Wow, that's awesome.
Reviewed by attorneys.
Yeah, sure.
So
you understand how it works.
I'm not practicing law. I don't claim to be a lawyer.
Okay.
All the disclaimers along those lines.
But clearly this is a passion of yours.
Yeah. And I've been coached by some really great people who know their stuff.
Great. It's good to have those allies and jobs like that. Very good.
Yeah.
What is happening right now in early 2023? What's happening that you're fighting for more adoptee rights? Where are we at right now?
So here's what's happening. The first law that ever was passed to get access to records was in Tennessee. And Caprice East and Denny Glad, two adoptees who devoted themselves to the cause, got that going. Then the Oregon Measure 58 was passed. Helen Hill basically spent her inheritance to help pay for that, which was amazing, incredible history. And things have slowly built and burgeoned until now. There are 12 or 13 states that have unrestricted access to original birth certificates, and in some cases more records. There are probably another close to 20 states that have some sort of incremental step or some sort of provision that isn't full access retrospectively, but have taken steps that way. And then another, whatever the math works out to, there are another 18, I think maybe, that are just sealed.
Oh,
So
wow.
lots of momentum just in this past 2 years during COVID. This is what's crazy. In the past 2 years, something like 8 or 9 bills have been passed.
Wow.
So the momentum is really building.
Wow.
A historic thing that happened here in Colorado this past year was we were able to help members of the donor conceived community get a bill passed that would prospectively require that if you donate sperm or eggs in Colorado, you also agree to have your identity revealed to the children created by that.
Okay. When they're 18?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And prospectively, help me understand what prospectively means.
Prospectively means going forward. It's going to start in 2025.
Okay.
So yeah, retrospective bills apply going backwards, prospectively apply going forward.
Excellent. Learned a new term today. Very good. Now, for people who are not in the adoption world at all that might be listening to this, or for adoptive parents that just haven't put much thought into this, I wonder how many of us are super surprised that like half of the states in the US, you cannot access your own birth certificate. Like that's crazy.
Yeah.
Does that just blow your mind every single day?
People say, so what do you do? And I say, well, what I do is I volunteer with these nonprofits and here's our cause. And the jaws drop constantly. They think, well,
yeah,
how can that be?
Yeah. In 2023.
And then you explain the history and the jaws drop further. And it really was, I generally believe this was true. I think in social media, there's sort of this tone that these evil people were trying to destroy us as adoptees and ruin our lives. I don't think that was the intent. If you look at the legislative history, Colorado is one example. Keep in mind, in the mid 20th century, we were moving away from a model of orphanages and orphan trains.
Yeah. They thought this was better, right?
And they were trying to say, let's get these kids in some kind of a stable situation. So what I share with legislators, and I really generally believe it's true, there were some bad actors, some mercenaries for sure, but most people were well-intentioned but short-sighted. Yeah. Where they wanted to create a stable home for kids. The laws in Colorado basically said, we need a law that lets adoptive parents, protects them from adopting a child about whom they know nothing. Okay. Protects a birth parent from hasty or coerced decisions. We know that didn't happen very often, but that was what their goal was. Yeah. And protects the adoptee from knowing nothing about their history, and protects the stability of the adoptive family from an unwanted intrusion by a birth parent. Okay. And so that was really what was driving the sealed records and the secrecy at the time. Okay. A lot of legislators have this idea in their head that they were protecting the birth parent's secrecy, the birth parent's privacy, when in fact, the sealing of the records was more often driven by, there were some sensational stories where the adoption was kind of a loosey-goosey thing. A family said, we're going to keep your baby until you get on your feet. 6 months later, mom comes back. Adoptive parents say, oh, well, gee, this is our baby now. We love this baby and you can't have this baby back. And there were court proceedings. And so a lot of it was really to, quote, stabilize the adoptive family from being interrupted by the birth parent. Does that make sense? Oh,
interrupted, quote unquote. Yes. Yes, that makes sense. And that's who has the power in this whole conversation, right? Out of the three people, adoptive parents, birth parents, and the adoptee, the adoptive parents are the ones with the power and the money, right? Sure. Typically. Yeah.
And that's
who they're trying to protect.
Yeah. And that's something we've put to legislators, that not discounting the genuine love that's involved in many, many relationships. But when you look at adoption as an economic system, which it is, it's a multibillion-dollar industry globally, then you assign the role of product to yours truly. Yeah. You assign the role of manufacturing sector to the people popping out the babies. Yeah. You assign the role of broker to agencies and attorneys and social workers, and you assign the role of buyer to the adoptive parent.
It feels terrible, but that's exactly what it is.
And it's just what it is. It's a reality.
It's what it is.
It's part of the political game. You know, you get thick-skinned.
I suppose they're trying to throw you off, I'm sure.
I had a senator who grew up with an adoptee in our group. This was wild, but I had a state senator say, I was talking to him about one of our bills, and he looked at me and said, well, you know, if it was me, I'd just be glad I wasn't aborted.
That again. Okay.
And it was another one of those moments of do not respond to that immediately. But I looked back calmly, and, you know, by the grace of God, I just said, you know, I think we're all thankful that we weren't aborted, but that really has nothing to do with this issue.
Yeah. Oh, man. Oh,
And
man.
he turned red and walked away and eventually held his nose and voted yes for our bill. But
Okay. All right. Well,
yeah.
I'm sure your calm and your ability to regulate yourself in those situations is an asset to your cause, because it would be easy to just go, what? What did you just say? Blah, 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 and go off the rails. And then they say, see, those adoptees are cuckoo and we need to protect them, protect the adoptive parents from them. They're right. You could see how that could go bad.
Sure.
So yeah, good job.
There are a few poster children out there who sadly publicly provide reasons why the records should not be opened.
Shoot.
And that's not a good thing. I mean, most of us are just normal people.
Yeah, just have your own information.
Just want to know where we came from. And
Honestly.
If it turns into a relationship, great. If not, that's okay.
Yeah.
But it helps everybody relax.
And the health records and just know who you are. Come on. That's crazy.
Another thing that I've said in committee meetings that has helped legislators perk up, because our real goal is to normalize this and just take the gas of the shame and the secrecy out of it. Mm-hmm. And that's why one of the things I often will say in committee is, genealogy is the number 2 hobby in the country behind gardening if you don't count video games. Yeah. So why is this normal for everybty except adopted people?
Yeah. Why are adopted people blocked?
Yeah. How is it that we're somehow disloyal or ungrateful, or that it's viewed as a commentary that your love wasn't enough and that sort of thing? This is a normal thing.
Yeah, totally.
Ancestor worship is part of a lot of world religions.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the lineage is extremely important.
You look at the Judeo-Christian tradition, knowing your tribe, knowing where you came from.
Yeah, holy cow, half the Old Testament is just begat, begat, begat.
Yeah.
It's just lists of lineage. That's how important it was. It went in the Bible.
Yeah. And so if we start to look at it and normalize it a little bit, then everybody gets to relax. And that's where, even now in the advocacy that I do, I absolutely believe in an adoptee's human right to know where they came from. Mm-hmm. I really minimize use of the term adoptee rights simply because it's inflammatory now.
Oh, really?
Because if you go into a legislature and pound the table and say, I demand adoptee rights, someone is immediately going to stand up and say, well, what about birth parent rights? Oh. And you've immediately created an adversarial situation that implies that somebody needs to be protected from somebody else.
Oh, I see. So what do you call it instead of adoptee rights?
So instead, what we really are advocating for is truth and transparency in adoption.
Oh, that's much better.
And the tagline is, it's good policy for everybody.
Yes, kind of like universal design for disabilities, right?
Yeah.
You put the curb cuts in there so strollers and wheelchairs and everybody can ease into it, right? It's the same idea.
Yeah, I like that. I haven't thought about that. Maybe can I borrow that?
Of course. Yeah, universal design. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's the same principle.
Mm-hmm. Just make it easier for everyone to get their records, adopted or not.
And
is that right?
Well, the distinction there is that we make an important distinction between confidentiality from the public in adoption. We totally support confidentiality from the public. Mm-hmm. Susie down the block shouldn't be able to walk in and find out if I was adopted or who relinquished me.
Absolutely.
But there's a big difference between confidentiality from the public in adoption and anonymity among the parties.
Yes. Yes.
And once people get that, you can see the lights come on and they go, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, there are 2 different tracks there. Yeah. And you're fighting for the latter, not the former.
Yeah. One of the birth moms in our group, when she would testify in committee, very bright woman who relinquished in a non-coercive situation, even during the baby scoop era. She knew what she was doing. She felt like her choice was the right thing to do, but she was raised by an attorney herself. So she had a very brilliant legal mind. But when she would speak to committees, she would start off by saying, my son rode around in my uterus for 9 months and passed through my birth canal. He's part of my privacy. He gets to know who I am.
Yeah. And I think it's brilliant that you bring in birth parents into this. So it's not an us or them. It's you guys are a united front. I think that's so important.
Oh, absolutely. Because the first parents who lived the relinquishment experience An adoptee can stand up and say, mothers were never promised confidentiality. Well, there are adoption agencies who would differ with that. They say, well, we actually did promise them confidentiality. But when you get a first mom who relinquished, who stands up and says, here's how it worked. Nobody was making me promises. I was being told what to do. And the only thing I was promised was that I would never see my baby again. That was what I was promised.
Ouch. Yeah.
That's a very different scenario. And it debunks that cultural myth.
Yeah.
And the reality is that even if somebody made that promise, it was in excess of reality and the law.
Yeah. And before DNA.
Yeah. But you could still go to court. It didn't happen very often.
Oh, you still could go to court if you really had the money and time and wherewithal to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's always been a way to get those records. It was oppressive and expensive and very rarely happened.
Yeah.
After I found that my birth parents were deceased, and incidentally, they are both named on my original birth certificate, which is kind of rare in Colorado. Only about 25% do have both names on them.
Oh, interesting.
But once I found them and went to court, got a court order allowing me to get my records. This was in the mid-90s. I was maybe the third person in the state who had ever done that.
Wow.
The records clerk, I took in the court order and I said, I'm here for my original birth certificate and my records. She became incensed. She didn't know what to do. She said, well, how did you get this? This never happens.
Oh, she's all flustered. Wow.
And she was treating this like they were her records, like it was her job. It was her sworn duty to keep me from seeing these records. And she said, this doesn't have the court seal on it. And I flipped it over and there was the court seal.
Yeah.
She said, I'm calling the court right now. I
Oh
so
my gosh.
she called the court.
Jeez, like you're a criminal for wanting to know your own information. That's horrible.
So things like that just continue to fuel the fire going, this is so wrong.
That just must feel so demeaning to you when you're confronted with that right in your face. Like, really?
It's a double, triple, quadruple whammy because if on the one hand, for whatever the reasons, whatever the intentions, on the one hand, your welcome into the world is a farewell. At your most vulnerable, loving, needy, lovable, needy moment, somebody says goodbye. That's not easy to absorb.
Right.
And then once you start asking questions about it, the state says you are somebody's dirty little secret and whatever happened is so bad. These things are under lock and key and you got to get a court order. And even once you get the court order, you don't deserve to have it. And you're probably a criminal for getting it. It's a steep climb for a lot of adoptees. And this is why changing the laws are so important. This really is why we need adoptive parents as allies. We need first parents as allies. We need counselors and therapists and people committed to open adoption and truth and transparency in adoption as allies.
Yeah.
It's not just about us, but when it's all of us. I have yet to meet an adoptive parent who doesn't want their kid to be happy and healthy and know who they are.
Yeah.
If you love your child, how could you not?
So tell us, as an adoptive parent, what can we do? Like, literally, what can we do?
So one of the best things that you can do is create an environment where it's safe to talk about these things. It's awkward. It's difficult. Teenagers, especially, brain scientists tell us that once you're around 13 or 14, you develop the ability to think a little more analytically, a little more abstractly. And so the old news of your mommy loved you so much when you were in her tummy, she gave you away and God brought you to us.
They start questioning that.
That kind of goes away about the time Santa Claus does, right?
Yeah. And therefore, a lot of kids kind of fall apart during adolescence.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to hold all that together.
It's such a key identity formation time.
Yeah.
And I've seen both extremes where some adoptive parents are just shut down about it. Others become almost codependent about it. We're here. Do you want to talk about this? How are you feeling? Is everything okay? Do you want me to help you search? What do you want me to do? And the kid's going, not yet. No, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to play baseball right now. Or whatever.
Here, I've gone out. I know who she is. I've got all these records. Anytime you want them, I've just got them for you.
Yeah.
And on the flip side of that can also be infantilizing.
Right.
Because everybody comes at this at a different time. They come at it with a different sense of power around it. And if the courts have told you you're a perpetual child, an infant, and now your parents are saying, well, you're also a perpetual child and you need me to do this for you instead of coming to the time in your life where you're ready to do it. I'm here to support you. that doesn't help us developmentally either. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And it's so tough because, in our eagerness, I'm sure I did the part that went too eager. Because I was like, I will help you. I will do whatever I can to help you. And when I kind of came out of the fog of adoption and trying to help him, I'm sure I pushed him farther than he wanted to go. And I was meaning well, but yeah, I'm sure I was too eager. So there's some balance in there.
Yeah. And everybody's different. I don't want to overgeneralize, but boys just have a harder time wrapping our heads around this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're slower to develop emotionally. We're slower to wake up to the issues.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why, I don't know if you're ready to segue into this, but that's kind of why I'm also very passionate about helping male adoptees.
Yes. Tell us about your work on that area.
Well, the whole male adoptee support thing evolved out of conferences and advocacy. The vast, vast majority of the people who've been leading this movement have been female. Thank God for the women who've taken this up and had the emotional wherewithal to lead the charge. And so I would started going to conferences where we would talk about these issues and that sort of thing. And there'd be 90% women and 10% men.
Wow.
And I would get mothers coming up to me saying, my son doesn't want to talk to me. Why do you think he doesn't want to talk to me? And I'm going, I don't know. I wanted to find my mother and she's dead.
Yeah.
But thank you for bringing that up.
You would have talked to her. Oh, shoot.
And so out of that came the need to have workshops at conferences for male adoptees specifically.
Nice.
So it was a place where we could talk about things through our lens, and there's a spectrum of maleness we understand in society as well. But it's a place where we could talk about our commonalities and how we're processing this, and it's really been a powerful experience. Now, the funny thing is, once we had workshops specifically for male adoptees, there would be women who would raise their hand and say, well, how come we don't get a girl adoptee group? And I'm like, well, the whole conference is a girl adoptee group.
Yeah, right. Right.
And we all get along well. It's fine.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a targeted special place where just the way we say things, the way we process things, sometimes the point in life or the things that bring us to those things. If you're talking about addictions, addiction covers a whole spectrum of thoughts and behaviors and attitudes, and often they're interwoven. You don't just pick one. I choose alcohol. That's good. Well, they all intersect, right?
Yeah. And a lot of times you give up one and you go get another one. Usually, hopefully safer.
You may be squeezing the balloon, right? So jumping from alcohol to being a workaholic to porn to, I mean, whatever it is that helps you numb out,
Any number of things. Yes. And oh man, I hope someday my son will attend your men's groups. You have them online, right?
Yeah. Every month we do male adoptee Zoom. It's on the second Tuesday of the month at 7 p.m. And we get people on our mailing list and send out that Zoom link once we've verified that they are who they are.
Okay.
And then once a year, we do a retreat up in the Colorado mountains, usually around Winter Park, the male adoptee / alumni, because we also welcome foster care alumni to come.
Oh, okay.
Summit, where we get a chance to just a little more bro time to get away, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. So do you go camping, or is it like glamping, or
it's in hotels.
Hotels. Okay.
Some of us are too old to be sleeping on the ground anymore.
Yeah.
Although a couple guys have camped, like they've just brought their stuff and camped and drive in. It's like,
you're in Colorado, you might as well camp if you like camping. Oh, that sounds so great. I hope someday my son's in a place where he can grab onto that. I keep offering different things, and he says, Mom, I'm afraid they won't accept me.
Yeah.
Which is the adoption story, right?
Sure.
I don't want to get rejected, so I don't want to try. So I thought maybe if there's just men there, he would feel more comfortable. Because the breakdown, there's slightly more women than men that get adopted, but not 90% to 10%. It's more like 55 to 45. Do you know the statistics?
I don't know that statistic offhand, but that kind of makes sense. I think generally there are more female births than male. So.
And if you figure in all the Chinese adoptions that were almost all girls.
Right.
So there needs to be a lot more men stories in the space. In fact, I am trying to alternate men, women in my episodes, because I want the male adoptee voices to be out there for people like my son that need to hear other guys. It's a thing. And obviously you're in other spaces where in your activism for the legislative pieces of it, you're in mixed company. But I think those silos are really important to go over here with just people that really can understand you in a certain way. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And that's true for everybody in our community, that that we need a forum where everybody's together to hear each other's perspectives.
Yep.
And then you need to go back into your silo. I like that word, where first moms, relinquishing moms, coerced moms, they need to be together.
Yes.
Because nobody gets it.
Nobody understands like them.
Adoptive parents need to be together going, here's what I'm feeling, here's what I'm experiencing, what the heck is going on? And so you really need both and sort of a flow back and forth where
some together and
you
some
say things.
separate.
And as long as I've been at this, sometimes I'll be in a meeting and I'll say something that to me just seems like a very innocuous, harmless truth. And somebody from another perspective gets up and walks out of the room because I've offended them.
Oh, shoot.
They're like,
so hard.
What did I say? What was wrong about that? I thought I was just telling the truth.
Shoot.
I'm wired to be a little bit blunt and straightforward, but
well, that's okay. That's good. That's probably helpful in your advocacy work. So, but yeah, there's so many people that they're traumatized and are very sensitive in certain areas. So I'm sure that people get their feelings hurt or get their feathers ruffled pretty easily in the space, but
lots of eggshells and landmines and time bombs. And I think that's one of the things that has affected our effectiveness as a movement, really, is we spend so much time playing out our issues on each other.
Yeah, there's a lot of brutality, adoptee against adoptee, even. And certainly against adoptive parents, we get that a lot. But even adoptees amongst themselves, I see it all the time, just like attack. I'm like, what? Why are you attacking each other?
Yeah.
So I don't understand that.
I think as a movement, we're making progress. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
And legislative advocacy is not for the faint of heart. And if you haven't done significant work and come to a place where you're comfortable with people saying offensive things to you, you are not a legislative advocate yet. Can't
be a snowflake. No snowflakes. Get a little bit of a tough stand. Shoot.
Don't jump in until you're ready to be constantly offended and triggered.
Oh, gosh.
And able to put your hat on and manage that. And then, yes, you can go out in the car and scream and yell and call your friends and talk to your support group and blurt out all kinds of cuss words. But
is there anything regular old people can do if they're not willing to go sit at those tables like you're doing? What can we do? Can we send money to somewhere? What can we do?
I love that question. One of the things that we're finding is grassroots movements are great. And I actually wrote a blog about this. It was entitled The M Word.
Money?
Yes. In our movement, I was kind of comparing the adoptee rights / truth and transparency movement, which started at about the same time as the gay rights movement in the mid 70s. And comparing some of the differences, there's no less passion that adoptees have about this. There's no less truth to the cause. There's no less egregious things going on and marginalizing going on. Talking points are in some ways similar. The difference is the LGBTQ plus movement has raised a ton of money and they've gotten the job done.
Yep.
The birth parent adoptee movement has said, I shouldn't have to give money for something that's rightfully mine already. And somebody needs to do this. Why aren't you doing this? And if you are doing it, you're doing it wrong because that's not the way I think it should be done.
Oh, God. Yeah. So, and it takes money.
Yeah. Not every state needs it. But with the Coalition for Truth and Transparency in Adoption, we have a demonstrated track record. Just in Colorado alone, since 2014, 15 bills have been passed that have helped adoptees, that have helped birth parents, that have helped foster youth, that have now helped donor-conceived people.
Nice.
And in a couple of states, especially conservative states, it's a heavy lift. And you don't even get in the door without a lobbyist in some places.
Oh, and that's expensive.
We've found people who are willing to work at a reduced rate. A lobbyist that we've worked with in Wisconsin last year They represent companies like Xcel Energy and Walmart. What do you think they get paid per year to do that?
Oh my God.
They're willing to work for us for about $10,000 a session, which is a steal.
Ooh, that's still a lot of money. Oh my God.
Yes, it is.
$10,000.
Yes, it is a lot of money.
Ooh. Okay, so send your money.
So this is what we're talking about is we're looking for benefactors. Mm-hmm. We're putting together we call it the Breakfast Club.
Okay.
Where it's putting together a breakfast for legislators who come to the National Conference of State Legislatures.
Okay.
Because it's one thing to stop at your table and get handed a card and get a 30-second elevator pitch. Mm-hmm. It's another thing to be fed a delicious breakfast and have an hour to delve into these topics.
Okay. Food speaks volumes. Yeah. Okay, good.
Food makes for happy legislators. Yes. Happy legislators listen and then sponsor your bill and vote. Yes.
Very good.
And so this is just how it works.
Okay.
So thank you for asking.
Yes.
And in the meantime, what parents can do is just talk it up.
Yeah.
Be open, share, educate the people around you.
And I will put the link to the Truth and Transparency organization. That's where to put the money, right? In your
Yes, please.
The lobbying organization.
The 501c4, yeah.
C4, good. I'll put the link there so you can donate to that. Very much necessary. I can see that.
Yeah, and be aware it's a 501c4, so it's not tax deductible.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But that also means that every penny you give, I don't get paid. I do not make a dime for doing this. Mm-hmm. Wow. I might get reimbursed for some expenses, but I'm not a paid lobbyist. Every penny you give will go to the cause.
Well, that's so great. Is there anything else you wanted to mention that I haven't asked you about yet?
Well, do you have another day or so?
I know you have so many things cooking.
Yeah. The one thing I wanted to throw out there too is as we're learning more about trauma and brain science, mm-hmm. is the importance of things like art and music and creativity mm-hmm. in terms of expressing things, accessing our emotions. On the ASRC website, the 501c3 website, we have a whole section that has a list of movies, song lyrics, TV series, where if you're feeling down, if you don't have words, I have one friend who says, I just need to get some tears out. Do you have something that can make me cry?
Oh, wow. And you have a whole playlist of make me cry.
Yeah, you can go there and go through the playlist. And if maybe you need to get fired up, there's some inspiring stuff too.
Nice.
But there's some recommendations there. And sometimes just a lyric or a phrase. If you need to rage a little bit, there's some good rage songs on there too.
Nice.
From male adoptees at our last male adoptee summit. In fact, we all talked about our favorite rage songs.
I also tell my son, because he writes songs and he gets a lot of his angst out that way. So, but I bet some of them would be appropriate to put on there. I'll see if he would be interested in doing that. How do people, if there are artists listening, how do they get their art on your list?
Yeah, on that page, you can go and submit a song for consideration to post. Uh-huh. And up at the top, it'll say, if you've got something you want us to post or consider, click here. It's basically our email, info@asrconline.org.
Nice.
And we'll look at it and put it up. But
yeah, that's amazing.
It's a common experience. People all over the world are tapping into it.
Nice.
And it's kind of exciting. It's a really exciting time to be part of this movement.
Yeah. And music and art and film, those are great ways to get your whole mind and soul wrapped around this issue and not just your frontal lobe, Yeah. And really feel it. It can get to the feels a little bit easier sometimes.
Yeah. You let it seep in and you hear things from other perspectives. We have a few songs up there for moms who relinquished from Broadway shows and things like that. Blood Brothers is one where the soundtrack from the character played by Petula Clark, among others.
Oh, wow.
And some of the songs that she sings are just incredible. So
wow. Nice. Okay. That's a great resource. I'll list all these in the show notes. So don't worry if you weren't near a pencil when we were saying these websites. So I'll put them all in the show notes. So go look at those. Well, it's been really lovely talking to you, Rich. And I'm so impressed with all of your work you're doing. You're taking your own pain and inequality and flipping it around and saying, okay, I'm going to work as a volunteer. Everybody heard that. I want to make sure they heard that you're just doing this as a volunteer, not as a profession and not for any monetary gain. Not that there'd be anything wrong with that either, but that you're dedicating your life to this cause. And I'm just so impressed with you. Thank you for all the work you're doing.
Well, thanks so much for having me. And thanks so much for being a voice in the adoptive parent community, because when adoptive parents show up, do not underestimate your power to change things.
Yeah, I think if as many adoptive parents can get on board with this, that should help move the needle quicker, because out of the three, that tends to be the ones with more money and more leverage in a lot of ways. So not always, but yeah, we need to help out for sure.
Well, and a quick parting thought is a common question I get at the legislature is, well, aren't you happy in your adoptive family? Don't you love your adoptive parents? Weren't they enough? And in fact, if you look at the idea of the safe haven and the secure base, it's the adoptees who either feel totally disconnected or the ones who have that safe haven and secure base that if I get a rejection at the legislature, I've got somebody behind my back who's going, no, do this. This is the right thing.
Yeah.
So it's actually a compliment if your kid becomes an activist.
Oh, absolutely. When earlier in the interview, when I was asking you that you had a pretty normal-ish upbringing, even though you're adopted, but that you're not coming at this out of, some sort of horrible pain. You had a good life and you are fighting for your own rights. And I think that's really important for all of us to understand. And adoptive parents, definitely, we can step up and help out a lot more, for sure. All right. Well, thank you for being here, Rich. Thanks for sharing all of this great information with our audience. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. And make sure and find Rich's organizations in the show notes. Like I said, find Unraveling Adoption on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. If you're an adoptive parent or foster parent or kinship parent and are interested in joining our group called Aptitude, a support group for adoptive parents facing adoptions challenges, I invite you to join. It's free, and all the information for that is on our website, unravelingadoption.com. And one more thing, we do have Patreon if you're interested in helping us maintain our commercial-free status. You can join for just a couple bucks a month and help us offset our expenses over here. So thank you for listening. Please share this episode with someone you know. And Rich and I want you all to stay safe.